There we go. So, hello properly this time. Yes, welcome back to Surviving Mars. And this time around, what I'm going to do is we're going to start a new game, and we're going to look at an easier starting scenario because the previous two streams. I mean, I showed off a little bit of my own developed colony, but we were mostly concentrating on one of the difficult or more difficult sets of starting options, both in terms of the mission sponsor and the location. But I'm thinking the majority of the people are not going to be wanting to jump in quite that much at the deep end because it really does represent quite a challenge. So the game itself gives you an easy start option, but I'll go through the actual options that you get when setting up.
I'm surrounded by
right away with a host from Pricey Gaming. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll go from the start in terms of like the possible options when setting things up. Now, bear in mind, I've played this a fair bit since I've had the preview copy. There might be a couple of things that change with the live version on Steam. I'm sure Havermont are extremely busy at the moment, working through all the last minute stuff. But yeah, this should at least be good for a little while. Some things might change further down the line, and of course there might be one or two things that I've just overlooked because I've been and read some of the dev threads, and I've looked through answers on the forums, and I've actually given my own feedback on the forums about stuff that I feel should be in the game, and also I put in some ideas for what might be fun DLC because why not? But bearing all that in mind, this is all going to be about what's possible right now and how you should be getting stuff set up right now. So this is the very first screen you'll get, and this is where you pick your mission sponsor, of which there is a whole list. So you've got the International Mars mission, which is the very easiest, right the way down to Paradox Interactive, which is the hardest. But I think that one is only available if you've signed up for a newsletter on the Paradox website or something along those lines. I don't think that's automatically available to everyone, but that one is quite difficult. And one thing that it doesn't necessarily show here is it's not just the number of rockets that you get, which is important, and it's not just the bonuses, but the amount of fuel that it takes to refuel your rockets, which is an important factor, especially when you're starting up a colony for the first time. That does vary with the difficulty level as well. So yeah, you've got International Mars mission, which is the absolute easiest. We've got the USA, who they're not even like they're. Some of them are easy in different ways. So some of them are easy because they just give you a lot of stuff. Others they give you specific bonuses or malices. So we'll go for a fairly easy one. We won't maybe go for the International Mars mission. We'll actually maybe go for Europe, which is that's just a normal starting one, but that does give the every time you get text. This is more of a science-focused starting sponsor. You get some money. So I want to try this out. This isn't the easiest possible. If you're just starting off, I'd go with one of these ones at the top here. But we're going to try this one just to see how it works out. We also get some extra starting tax as well. In fact, I think we actually get bonus research as well. Yeah, 400 research from the sponsor instead of 300. So that ought to help us get through the tech tree a bit quicker. So that's the mission sponsor. Then you've got your commander profile. And the commander doesn't really, they give you either some startup bonuses or some ongoing bonuses, and some of them are kind of useful when you're first getting started but not really useful after that. Some on the other hand are, it maybe takes a little while for it to become useful to you, but once it is, it's useful all the way through. And some of them, how useful it is varies depending on where you're picking as your startup option. So for instance, the Hydro Engineer, the Water Reclamation Tech, which gives you a spire building to reduce water consumption. In practice, I haven't found that building very useful at all. I think I built one dome that had that and then realized after a while it wasn't giving me any benefit. However, that other bonus, which you get basically reduced water consumption, if you're starting somewhere that has fewer water deposits, for example, that comes in very, very useful. So it's not just about, what immediately it looks like. It's also bear in mind that it might benefit you depending or in different ways depending on which landing site that you actually go for. So we're going to go for what should we go for? Let's go for politician. Politician, and again, this is just going to be easy in terms of making sure we're not going to run out of funds, and funds are very, very useful because funds just mean you can buy stuff. Rocket scientist is another fairly recommended one because it gets you the shuttle hub early on, and it also gives you an extra rocket, which can actually make, you know, some of the more difficult starting sponsors a bit easier because you've got an extra rocket. But no, we're going to go with politician, which gives the extra funding, and I think, yeah, we'll do that so that we'll have very little chance of just running out of money. Colony logo, oh, I don't even know. What should we go for? Don't panic, why not, I guess. And then there's the mystery option, and you can actually choose one. Personally, you know, I would just leave it on. Mysteries can vary in how difficult they are to deal with, but they are also currently one of the most interesting things in the mid to late game. So if you turn that off, I honestly feel like you're missing out a big chunk of the gameplay experience of surviving Mars as it is at the moment. For the benefit of the chat, by the way, I mean, this is all like going to go as a VOD on YouTube. But if anyone has any questions as we go along, you know, there might be stuff that I'm not thinking of or that I'm just not explaining properly. So, you know, if you're in the chat, do feel free to ask stuff. So then we have our embarkation screen, as we would call it if this was Dwarf Fortress. Basically, we are going to be picking the materials we're bringing with us, and then we'll get to pick the colonists that we'll bring with us. Now, one thing that it usually does give you several of, which I don't think are that useful, are the orbital probes. So I usually maybe only take one of those, and we'll do that. And orbital probes basically give you instant scanning of a sector, but you can scan sectors once you're down on the surface. It's just, this is a way to get a quick head start on getting all the surrounding sectors done. But it frees up some funding if you know, because they're 100 million each. So it's not the cheapest thing in the world, and I'd much rather have some bonus starting resources. So we're going to have an explorer. Also, I mean, having said that, it also represents, each one of these is 1,000 kilos apparently. I think I'd much rather have, can we have a rover? How much do they weigh? 10,000. Oh, okay, so we're actually struggling for, okay, that's fine. Well, we'll actually just, let's take a look at the prefabs. I was thinking we could maybe squeeze a rover in there, but we don't have the weight limit, so that'll have to be a separate rocket, but we have the funding, basically. The Explorer, yeah, I guess we'll start with that. So a transport rover and a drone hub rover we'll take at some later point. Okay, prefab buildings. Fuel refinery we'll want. Moisture evaporator, drone hub we need, and I think we'll actually take a Stirling Generator as well, because that just gives you constant electricity, and that's going to be quite useful. So that eats up a pretty big chunk. You know, the Stirling Generators are expensive just because they are so useful. At some point when we get set up, we'll want to make sure we have enough funding for each of these as well, because until you get the technologies, you can't build these things yet. You can only get the prefabs. So it's important to make sure that you've got enough money for those. So we've got some drones. We have a stockpile of each of these things. We're going to have one orbital probe. And or do we want even maybe just some more? I do find that I kind of... No, we don't have enough carrying capacity for more of these things, so we might as well just go with the one orbital probe. Okay, so that's us getting set up. The basic materials, you know, you can buy those as well, but generally speaking, I mean, your colonist rockets come with food. Now, again, this, you know, how much food the colonist rockets do come with is based on your starting sponsor. So the International Mars mission, for instance, I had in my very first game, I had a really long lead-in time before I needed to build any farms because the colonists came with so much food. The Paradox mission, on the other hand, it was literally 1 unit of food per colonist. So I had to get farms set up ASAP. I did not have that cushion. With the Europe mission, I don't know how much it's going to be. The game doesn't actually tell you that when you're starting up. But, you know, you can order these basic things straight from Earth if you want to. But it's going to eat up money, of course. So then we want a landing site. Now, I think the easy start quick option gives you this landing site here, Valles Marineris, which has a reasonable amount of resources, plenty of water, importantly, and also not a lot in the way of disasters. I played this again. This was the first game I played through. I've mostly only had to deal with the very occasional meteor, and the rest of them have not been an issue. The other game we set up on the top of Olympus Mons, by contrast, if I can find it, which shouldn't be that difficult because, you know, it's the tallest thing in the solar system, or the tallest volcano in the solar system. There we were having fairly frequent dust devils and dust storms, which didn't make much sense given that we're poking, like mostly out of the atmosphere. But anyway, so I mean, you know, some things are just based on the geography as well. If you're closer to the polar caps, for example, you're going to get way more cold waves because they're, you know, I believe it's CO2 ice on Mars. It's not water ice, it's carbon dioxide ice. You wouldn't want to build on it. But yeah, I mean, you get then a rather different, you know, a mix of potential things that can go wrong. And in this instance, and you can pick anywhere, by the way, it's semi-randomized best I can tell, in terms of the terrain and the actual resources that you'll get. But I have read of people picking the same location and getting the exact same distribution of resources when it's in theory, based on what Hemimont have been saying, it's supposed to be a different distribution of resources. It's supposed to be randomized in that regard, but it doesn't appear that it is. So who knows? The jury's out on that one. But yeah, we will just go with Marineris Alpha as it's marked here. This is a nice, easy start location. There are, as you can see, some pre-marked ones, which all have their own, like, these are, you know, places they've picked out that are interesting in different ways. So some of them have got high resources, but higher threats of things going wrong, for example. Maybe, I was thinking we'd just go for the Marineris side, but we might actually pick one of these ones. You could maybe demonstrate. Yeah, I'll go with this one, Elysium Beta, which looks like... Why would you go for Alpha rather than... I don't know. Yeah, we'll go for that one. So we've got altitudes. Topography is important because it's how much buildable area you've got. So building on the side of Olympus Mons, for example, there's not going to be a lot of flat ground that you can build on. So yeah, pay attention to that as well. That does dictate, like, the maps are all the same size, but how much building area you get in that map is dictated by your the topography rating. So we've done that. And did we skip through the colonist? Oh no, of course we haven't had our... Why am I thinking that we were going to select colonists now? No, of course, right. Well, you probably already know this, but, you know, you start off with unmanned drones. You're setting things up remotely, and then you bring in the colonists. So we get the colonists later on. I'm getting myself turned around there. So we've got one sector that's marked already. As you can see, we've got this... would you even call that a crater? It's a bit of a... I don't think it really is a crater. We've got this kidney bean-shaped depression. We will be able to access that later on. There are tunnels that let you traverse different elevations. But starting at a higher elevation isn't really a bad thing because it means we get better wind power when we're using windmills as a power source. So what we'll do is we'll use our Orbital Probe, which I think we just left-click. I don't know what has the most. It does tell you, you know, the amount of buildable area. We'll go with that one. Why not? And there we go. We can see we've got a nice concrete deposit there, which is going to be useful. We've also got an anomaly that our rover can take a look at. So if I put that down there, okay, this is our rocket now coming down to land, which we'll toggle that option off for the moment. There are various options with the rockets themselves. I mean, launch is self-explanatory, but the one thing that you can export at the moment, rare metals, and I'll point those out when we get to them, you can basically toggle the rocket on or off whether you want it to actually go and like whether you want your drones to put things in those into the rocket for export back to Earth, and you can even set it once that's turned on so that the rocket will automatically go back and forth from Earth and load metals when it gets there. So what the drones are going to do first of all, well, what we have to do, because the drones won't do anything yet, is they'll just sit there. What we have to do is build some depots, some stockpiles, and the game does a lot of this automatically. Some of it does a bit too much automatically. It doesn't really give you many options as a player. This is something I'll definitely be covering in the review more. But in order to get your drones to collect anything, you have to put down a depot. Now, for starters, we're going to want a metal depot because it's metals that we're interested in collecting, and you do just get these surface deposits, mostly metals, but you'll get small ones of polymers as well, which are much rarer. So just stuff like that, that's just normal rocks. It's these small little deposits that you'll get. Now, if you have, and we might be able to demonstrate this later on, if we've got the remote control rover and the cargo rover, what you can do is you can send them off, you know, where there's some deposits. I don't even know. You could send them off. Let's pretend there are some deposits there. This is well outside the drone control area of the rocket itself, because the rockets do act as drone control areas. And you can set up a little depot, and your drones from controlled by the rover will collect stuff, and then you can use the cargo rover to ship it back to where it's useful. This was one of the bottlenecks I encountered with my Paradox startup. I didn't have a lot of starting funding, and I didn't have that rover, so I couldn't just go and collect metals from elsewhere on the surface. And so I ended up with a real bottleneck of metals early on, because I was dependent then on bringing in colonists to mine surface deposits, or the subsurface deposits, and that then becomes, you know, a bit trickier, because you've got those buildings needing maintenance, they need power, they need workers, your workers need food and oxygen and water, and you've got at the start, at any rate, quite a small number of colonists, and you're having to basically juggle things a bit. Now, it's telling me, okay, we can scan sectors and we can research technology, so we'll set that first. To scan sectors, and there's 2 levels of scanning. Later on there's a tech that lets you scan for deep deposits, but for the moment it's just kind of surface deposits. And what you can do is you can kind of queue up, as you can see, different sectors, and you can have 5 sectors in total. So it will just scan each of these in turn, and this is just from, I don't know, sensors on the rocket or something. So you know, that all just happens in the background. The other thing we want to do is set some research going, and we've already got a repeatable research option that gives us funding, so we can put in research time and get money out. And this is why I picked the European start, because it means we're very unlikely to ever run out of money. So we've got a whole bunch of various options. We've got upgrades, we've got buildings, rover options, and then you've got the breakthrough technologies, which unlock as you go along. Now, the technology tree itself is semi-randomized. There are some technologies that are always going to be in there, because there are some buildings you're always going to need. But this entire tech line, I don't want to call it exactly, we'll just go tech tree because that's the standard jargon, I suppose. That represents about a quarter of the total technologies in the game. So it's semi-randomized in that you don't quite know which technologies you're going to get as you go along. And so that makes no 2 playthroughs even exactly the same. This is one of the features about the game I rather like. because I like that idea of a blind or a semi-blind tech tree and not just knowing exactly what you're getting as you're going along. So the first one we'll pick is actually this one here. Rockets and shuttles require less fuel. That's an immediately useful one because we've got to refuel this rocket to send it back. But we do have other rockets available as well. We can click on this screen here and see that we have another rocket available. And so we can order more stuff if we want to. But well, actually, no, we will do that right away. Okay, just sending the rocket itself, by the way, is free. It's the cargo that costs money. Passengers, colonists, don't cost anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the second rocket sent. We're going to get the drone commanding rover and the transport rover brought right away. And we're also, I think, going to go for... there we go, the prefabs of each of these 3 buildings. Or, well, do we want to do that this early? I think we will, because these are important. We need these. And they are fairly vital in terms of getting your industrial supply going. So we'll get that rocket launched. You can rename these, by the way. You can also buy additional rockets, which is something that I think we will be doing because we've only got 2 so far. And like I say, with these particular starting options, I think we've got a decent chance of just generating a lot of cash. I can see here, by the way, this scan is almost complete, so that's fine. Right, so what we want to do is start building some infrastructure. So first things first, we will actually put down our Stirling Generator, which is going to start giving us some power. We're going to lay some power cables, and we've got these 2 concrete deposits here, and we've also got a metal deposit here. Now, if it's not immediately on the surface, and if it's a building, well, actually no, any building that requires workers has to be within the radius of a dome. So we're going to have to squeeze a dome in there if we want to use that metal deposit. All deposits have a grade, by the way, a rating, and that basically dictates how much you're going to get out of that particular deposit per tick, let's put it that way, per unit of time. So a high grade deposit, you will get through it quicker because you'll be bringing more out of the ground for the given efficiency of an extractor building. And you can increase the efficiency of extractor buildings with upgrades over time as you get technologies. But, you know, high is obviously preferable to low because you're just going to pull stuff out more. So they've built the prefab Stirling Generator. This is a unique power source, by the way, because it has actually 2 different modes. And those modes are, well, one of them is completely unique in that when it's closed, it generates 10 power, but it has no maintenance requirements. Now we can open it up and suddenly it will double its power output, but it's going to then start requiring maintenance. So we're going to keep that closed for the time being. This is why Stirling generators are expensive and useful, and they make a good baseline for your power production, and they also make a good kind of emergency boost for your power production because you can open them and suddenly you've doubled the amount of power that you're getting from those generators. So we're laying down that cable. We're going to build, well, we're going to start getting some concrete, so we'll build that. We also want to actually put down our drone hub, and it's just, the UI is a little, like if you've never played any of the Tropico games, the UI maybe takes a little bit to get used to. So you right click to bring up the menu and you have to right click to get rid of it again, and I didn't quite, like, it took me a little while to get my head around that, but I got there in the end. Also, our technology actually finished, and we could have queued up a bunch more, and I didn't because I wasn't thinking to, but so we'll just queue up more technologies, and at the moment we're purely relying on what we get from our mission sponsor, but there are other things that, well, you get labs. You get this technology here, for instance, so every Explorer rover you have gives you extra, in fact we'll have that one as our first one because we want the benefit of that sooner rather than later. So, oh, probes are cheaper and can deep scan, so that one's going to be useful because we can deep scan, we can get that second level of scanning on sectors with probes early on. Subsurface heating, I don't think we need that just yet. applicants, increases research. Okay, that one's a very, very useful one, and so in fact we'll do that. You can't, this is one of the slight things with the UI that's a bit annoying. You can't click and drag to reorder your technology, so you can only click them away and then re-add them. So yeah, we'll go for that one, and then we'll go for that one, and then we'll go for that one actually. This is a more high density housing option, which is actually quite useful in the early game when you've got the small domes and you need the like spaces at a premium in the dome, so you need that higher density even if people are going to be less happy living in them. And then we'll put that one for our less technology. Now as you go up the kind of, I think it's like every 1 or 2, you know, like the tech costs do increase, so it will steadily get longer. But Jedi. Yeah. Oh, thanks for the Twitch Prime sub there, Brett. So you might have noticed this actually paused while we were in the text screen, so you don't have to worry about it ticking away in the background. So yeah, we're going to get the drone hub built with that Stirling Generator. By the way, it's currently generating power, but nothing's using power. That's why we've got that little symbol above it. So we want to build a concrete extractor. Now the way it works with concrete extractors particularly, and they're a bit unlike other resource buildings, which you just plonk over a deposit and they'll work away at it until the deposit is depleted. The surface deposits of the concrete, essentially, you know, the particular regolith that you're using to make Martian concrete from, you have to basically rebuild concrete extractors. You know, you have to demolish them and move them steadily around so that you're getting the entire deposit. You can't just put one down and be extracting from the entire deposit. So even though upgrades are available for concrete extractors, even in the late game, I never bother building them because you never get an expansion, to my knowledge, beyond this work area that you can see on the screen. You've got the extractor itself, and then you've got that white hexagonal tiled work area. And once it's extracted all the concrete from that work area, that's it. The building stops working, and all you can do is demolish it and build another one. So yeah, they do absolutely not seem worth upgrading. Now it is a little bit annoying that it gets kind of hard to see where you're putting it over the you have to kind of move it out of the way and see that you're not overlapping, because you want to get as much out of the deposit as possible. So you want to not be like, if I put it right there, right, it's not going to mine the stuff that's underneath the building itself, so it'll only work the stuff that's in this area. So you just have to kind of progressively try and cover the whole area if you're trying to extract all of the concrete. Is there any particular reason the rockets look like orcas? I think they're supposed to be based on some actual proposed design or something that would go on top of. I don't know. Maybe it's even like a Elon Musk thing, and they're based on a proposal for, you know, crewed rockets on top of the Falcon Heavy. I don't know. Oh, also thank you for the bits, Cyber. My headphones are not behaving today particularly, so if I'm missing sound notifications, that'll be why. So the drones are now going to take stuff across. This is all completely autonomic. I'll explain a little bit more about drones later on, but basically speaking, the game tries its best to guess what needs to go where, and it's not always very successful at it. Now in the early game this is fine, it doesn't really matter, there's not that much going on and the game can cope. But once I've started getting to bigger colony sizes, I've had some serious supply bottleneck issues at times, because the inherent downside of the system as it is in Surviving Mars at the moment is it's more or less entirely reactionary. You can't stock up stuff ahead of time outside of using the cargo rovers, and using those is incredibly fiddly and annoying, as I'm sure we'll get to demonstrate once this second rocket arrives. So okay, we've got concrete, we know where there's a metal deposit. Something we are going to need is at this point water. So we basically are, with all these drones, we're getting things ready to build our first dome and to get colonists for the first time. Now, there's kind of a semi-limited window with which to get things set up, and I think using this particular set of startup options where we're getting money from research, and we start off with that repeatable tech for research, you could potentially really stretch out this initial phase, because you could be getting money, and you could be getting funding and just bringing the supplies you need in by rocket, and just really keep going with the drones as long as possible. That might actually be an interesting kind of early game challenge, but we're not really going for that here. We're going to try and get to the stage of bringing people onto the planet for the first time and making sure that we're set up to keep them alive. So we need to scan for water deposits, basically, is the next thing, and we are scanning. But one thing we can do to help that, and one important building all the way through the game, I think it's in, oh, here we go, sensor tower, is this thing. Now, sensor towers basically give you early warning if there is an incoming disaster or a meteor or storm or whatever, but they also help with scanning the surrounding areas. It doesn't give a working radius, though. I'm not sure how much area sensor towers cover, but once this is built, we'll start to see that we scan a lot quicker, because there we go, sensor tower boost. And you can see that, because it's so close by, over here it's only 10%, but here it's over 300%. So that will significantly speed things up. So that's something you want to build early on. So we've got our little metal stockpile from the stuff we got from the surface. We don't have any other anomalies to go and scan at the moment. So we'll have the drone, the Explorer Rover, actually charge up, and you just right click on a section of cabling and they will charge up back to full power. Scanned. I did have a comment under one of the videos where, and you'll see that's actually then put me into a power deficit. So that does use up power from your grid when it's doing that. That's not just free power. Somebody in the comments under one of the live stream VODs asked why wasn't I using my Explorer Rover to explore faster. They don't work that way, essentially. You have to, you can only scan with the scanning method. You use M, basically, and that brings you up to the big map, the world map, and at that point you just click away on the map, and that's all you can do. You can't speed that up by using your science rover. So we've got the other two kinds of rovers now, the transport and the RC rover, and that's got 4 of its own drones. And what we'll do is the hub that the prefab that came with 4, we need to reassign the ones from the rocket. Now there's no wholesale way to do this, unfortunately. This is one of those little fiddly things that could use improving with the game. So we can reassign, and we literally just click, and there we go. That's now reassigned. That's now 5 drones, and we just have to keep doing that one by one. And as you can imagine, oh, I managed not to do that properly there. As you can imagine, that gets a bit fiddly after a while. So fortunately later on there is a building that lets you construct prefabs, and the prefabs you just in fact it's that button there. You can just add rover drones to the drone hubs directly. You're not having to bring them in from rockets anymore. However, that's not true for this fella. This fella, if you want to add more drones to it, you still have to use the manual method. So anyway, you've also got a service area slider here, which is exactly what it sounds like. I can't think of many circumstances where you're going to want it less than maximum, but I guess there might be. So, that's there. So what we're going to do is we're going to collect some more metals. And oh, there we go. We've got a water deposit there, and also polymers. Only 3, though. So we'll need to build some service structure down here to get to this water deposit. It's annoyingly far away at the moment, but it shouldn't be too bad. Right, what we'll do, so I'll demonstrate what I was talking about earlier. We'll use our RC drone, and we'll bring the transport over here as well. And this is more useful in the early game. Late game, I've not found these transport rovers that useful. They do have the ability to take whatever you want from different storages in increments of 5 up to a total of 45 for a full load. And you can also set them up for automatic supply routes, but they're not very intelligent about it. And because there's basically no kind of advanced stockpile management whatsoever, it makes it incredibly irritating to use, because you're basically having to constantly keep an eye on them, constantly check that they are doing what they're doing, that they haven't emptied the stockpile out, because you can't have like a designated supply stockpile where the drones will always try and keep that stockpile topped up, so then your rover can go and move stuff across. Sadly, there's nothing like that in the game as of yet. I'm hopeful they'll actually introduce something along those lines. But for the early game, at least, when you're wanting to manually move over a stock of metals, and this is all, well outside the drone hub area, we can do that. So it's useful for that at least. Oh yeah, the other annoying thing is they tend to run out of power, and that interrupts their orders as well. Right, so we found some new anomalies, both quite close by. You'll notice there's different symbols with the anomalies. So some of them just give you raw science, some of them can give you new technologies, and some of them give you little events that pop up. So you're not always going to get the same thing from those necessarily. So we're going to turn on the outliner at this point, which is that one. There we go. And as you can see at the moment, we have no colonists. So, I mean, most of the time you're going to be looking at the resource overview as well, but you can look at the it gives you some information. But if you're expecting the almanac from Tropico, which was a very nice way of presenting like slicing and dicing all the various bits of information that you'll find it's anything was relevant to your population, that mostly isn't in this game, and that's another thing I'm hoping they really add. So this is one of the little pop-up events we'll get, and that actually has generated a rare earth metals deposit. So that's actually really useful. That's quite close to where we want to be building a dome for the first time, and that's a very high quality one, and 1,000 for a non-deep level rare metal deposit. That's actually pretty nice as well. And that's going to be useful for manufacturing, because we want that to make electronics, but also for exporting back to Earth eventually. So we're going to need water sooner rather than later, because we need water to generate fuel for the rockets. So that's the next thing. Now, rather than try and link all of this down here, what we're going to have to do is use once they've collected all these metals, we're going to have to use the Rc Rover to just set up a separate little water extraction area, and then we're going to have to build pipes all the way back, or else I could just... No, we need another drone hub prefab from Earth actually. We could easily... Okay, we can get away with just one, because basically... what you want to do is you want to daisy chain your depots and your drone hubs. So if I've got a drone hub here and it's overlapping, you basically have a depot in the overlap, and what the game will do is go, okay, I can put resources there that are needed over here. So the drones from here will take the resources to there, and then the drones from there will collect the resources and take them to where they're needed. So we do need another drone hub. But what we can do first off is we're going to have to slightly wing it. This is not exactly optimal. It would have been nicer to have water close by to where we've set up our primary operations. In retrospect, maybe having a couple more probes would have been a good thing. But anyway, it's too late now. This seemed like a decent area, apart from the fact that we don't have any water nearby. So we've got all of those deposits collected. So what we're going to do is send that back to recharge.
Sector scanned. Select a sector to scan.
We are going to... how many metals are in there? 77. So what we can do is we'll click create transport routes, metals, and we'll say we want to unload in that depot. And that will just do it until either it runs out of power, or one of the depots is emptied, or the other depot becomes full. We could also maybe do with a bit more power generation at this point, so we'll build a wind turbine. And wind turbines work day or night, but they are also more expensive to maintain in terms of needing machine parts, whereas solar panels just need metal. We will also at some point build a storage battery, but we don't need that just yet. So we're starting to get more technologies available. In fact, there we go. We didn't even need to order a prefab for the polymer factory, but never mind. We'll go with should we go with the Moxie upgrade? That's a useful one. And we might even go for this first researchable technology to just looking at what's available. Stuff just becomes available as you research through the technology tree. So you know what, we'll go for the Martian patents and just generate some more funding. So, yeah, this is a slightly awkward start. This could be certainly better. But what we're going to do is we're probably going to get to demonstrate some more of it with the Rc Rover. Because we'll have to bring the materials that we need down here, basically. We're just going to use the Rc Rover as our drone hub, effectively. And get some water set up. Now we could try and build, you know, pipes and a network back here, but for the time being, well, we don't have any way of giving complete coverage, because that would cover up to that edge, but the rovers have a much smaller work area, although it could just about overlap. Could we have it be... No, it needs to be about there. Does that overlap? I think maybe just. Okay, so what we can do then is... we might just get away with this. Have a universal depot. Now this is another piece of UI rejigging that would be super useful. Would be if you could, when you're putting down depots, when you're trying to get it in between the work areas, if you could see what the work areas are, but unfortunately you can't at the moment. I'm hoping that's added relatively quickly, because that would be very, very useful. So we are going to go for a water extractor. Oh, we've also got a moisture evaporator. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, there's two methods of getting water. You've got a water extractor from getting from depots, and then the moisture evaporator just gives... well, you know what? Okay, I'm doing the needlessly complicated thing at the moment. We'll get the moisture evaporator and the fuel refinery set up first. You'll note, by the way, the drones are immediately taking stuff down here. As far as I know, the default behavior of the game is for universal depots in particular, drones will try and make sure every universal depot has something in it, but you can block off specific things. So I can say I don't want fuel, for example. That's as much control as you have over the depots at the moment. Right, anyway, moisture evaporator. We have the moisture evaporator. Now, as you can see, this has got a work area, essentially. Sometimes this represents, you know, like, for instance... The concrete extractor kicks up dust, and if you put another building too close, it will basically need maintenance more often. And actually we could put a dumping site there, which is a special kind of storage pile. Like this is the one waste resource in the game, waste rock, but there is a technology later on that lets you recycle it into concrete, so it becomes kind of useful, and you might as well just build the dumping sites to keep it out of the way, essentially. So, yeah, what will we do? So, moisture evaporator, we'll actually build that slightly further away. We'll build a tiny bit more cabling, and we will then need some infrastructure. So, we're going to need basically a water tower to go with that. So, we'll just put that there, why not? And pipes, and they're very, very close to each other, so that's fine. Now, at the moment, we're going to concentrate on fuel production, and if I can remember where it is, there we go, fuel refinery. We've actually got a prefab for that. So this is basically going to eat the entire water output of that. We'll put that there. Well, actually, no, we'll try and keep the amount of piping that we've got relatively short at the moment. So we'll actually put that right there, and then we just need a little bit of extra cabling. The longer, you know, the more cables you have, the more pipes you have, the more likely you are to get leaks, basically. So what we're going to do is, you'll notice the drones are all furiously taking things over to that universal depots, because the supply rocket had some extra stuff on it, and they didn't have anywhere to put it up till now, and it was just sitting in the rocket. So we can get some fuel going once there's power for that. and at the moment there is not enough power. So what we can do, we can put that on a low priority so that we are only getting fuel from that when we have sufficient power, so that the concrete extractor is always running. Or I could do it vice versa. I could put the concrete extractor on low priority and put that on higher priority. But also what we can do at this point is also like put down a solar panel or two, because solar panels are cheap both in terms of their building cost and in terms of their maintenance cost. Yeah, so this is me, like, this is the perils of doing this as a live stream. This is me not doing it entirely flawlessly, but you know, I'm newish to this game as well as everybody else, but I know enough to get the basics set up. I was going to do a whole complicated thing with the drone rover and then using that cargo rover to bring the resources over, and then it turned out not to matter, but that's fine. So anyway, so we have fuel output. These priority buttons, by the way, it's one priority button for everything. So power, maintenance, input, and repair. Well, that's the same as maintenance, really, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, and later on, if it's a building with workers, it also dictates the worker priority for buildings as well. This should be separate buttons. It should be, and I'm really hoping that, you know, by the time people are watching this video on YouTube in, like, complete. I don't know, 3 months' time or whatever, that it will be separate buttons, because that seems to me like it should be a relatively easy change to make. So if you wanted to have, for instance, a building that would have a low power priority but a high worker priority, at the moment you can't do that, but hopefully in future you will be able to. So let's see how we're doing. We've got power shortage in the evening, so because we've put this on a low priority, we're keeping the fuel refinery going. Now what we can do to make sure, and at the moment it's trying to supply both rockets equally, and we can actually untick the exports things there as well, so we can put that to high priority, and so therefore it will get preferentially fueled. We'll also probably want to build a fuel depot. Most buildings have their own like little internal storages, but they're not particularly like, there we go. Oh, actually it can store up to 100, so you don't even necessarily need a depot to begin with. It varies, you know, concrete you can only store 20, so it does vary how much individual buildings get. Also going to need another dumping site soon as well, aren't we? So we're not too bad for now, but yeah, we will want to get to this water deposit in terms of once we actually have colonists, or we want to do that in advance of getting colonists. So that plan still holds true. It's just we've pushed it back slightly. Right, so what are the technologies? Polymer factory. I guess we'll go... oh, rocket cargo space increased by 10,000 kilos. Well, you know what, we'll do that one, because that one will be very useful. Doesn't matter for colonists, but in terms of cargo, it absolutely does. Also, how are we doing for... I think our funding's actually... Yeah, so every time we research technology, we're getting a bit of funding. So, unlike some other starting options, we're very unlikely to run out of money. So, this is... At the moment, we're just kind of waiting to accumulate resources to some extent. We can start building down here. We can build our... start to get things going. But what we're really waiting for is this rocket to be fueled up so we can send it back. And then we can bring some stuff down. You know, buy some more stuff from Earth, essentially. There is a fair bit of this in the game, to be honest. And this is because this is one of the easier starting sponsors, and we've got the technology already. I think it was 50 fuel to start with. It only now costs 40. In the Paradox starting sponsor game, where you've got one rocket to start with, it costs at a base value of 100 fuel. And it'd be nice if it would tell you that in the sponsor screen as well, because it does vary. It's not just a fixed cost for fueling the rockets. So you're steadily building up concrete. We might even need an extra concrete depot. Depots are free. The only thing they cost you is a tiny bit of space, so you might as well just plonk down as many as you need. The only thing the only thing where you might want to optimize it a bit later on with the removing depots that you don't need anymore is so that your drones are they're trying to keep less depots supplied, basically. But to start off with, you can just plonk down as many as you need, and they're free to add, they're free to remove. And even if you remove a depot, in fact we can do that right now, we can remove this depot, and oh no, all the metals are going to disappear. Well, actually no, what happens is the metals are put into a temporary depot and it will try and put them elsewhere. So what we can do is we just re-add that depot and then plonk them back in there, and all that's cost me is some drone work time, essentially. So we'll move the worker drone down here. We'll actually have to charge it first. That's the big disadvantage of using this as a kind of replacement drone hub, is that it needs to be charged. And that kind of limits, you've got to bring it back to be charged every so often. But it's fine. On a temporary basis, it's fine. It doesn't really matter that much. So that's almost fully charged. So it was around about there. And we can also start thinking about where we want our first dome. And you can kind of pre-plan to some extent where you want things to be, which I will show you in just a second once we've gotten this cabling built. So it's just going to be me putting this cabling up to about, say, there. And we also are then going to need piping. And you can actually, piping is quite nicely done in this game, in that you can just basically if it looks like it'll fit under the piping, it will. So I could, for instance, have a depot partially under the piping, and it will let me do that, and that's not a problem. And the reason why I've put a waste depot there is that, like most extractors, this one will actually produce waste rock. So now we've got that cabling, we can actually just kind of permanently put that on top of the cabling, and that's fine. Also, it's telling me our scanning queue has completed, so we'll do that. And I maybe don't need to, but I'm going to put down another where are we? Another sensor tower. I don't know if it's necessary. I don't know if this is too close to the other one, because the game doesn't tell me that. It would be nice to know. But anyway, once we've gotten all that piping put in place, we will probably want to build a bit more water storage. And storage is relatively cheap, but you have to be careful not to go too mad, because it also costs you resources in terms of maintenance. So we're going to put down a water extractor, that's fine. And while that's doing that, we'll maybe have another wind turbine for the time being. And we'll get a power accumulator in place, so basically a storage battery. And we're starting to just get some more infrastructure in place, basically, because what we're going to now start thinking about is building our first dome. Now, you've got one size of dome to start with, and we want to put it near probably a metal deposit to begin with. So I think we'll actually want it on the other side of this concrete deposit. Now, as before, we don't get on the ground shown the limits of the drone hub, but it will tell you if it's too far. So that is saying, okay, too far, so that's fine. So we're going to place that there, so it's not overlapping the deposit, and it is near enough so it's in the work area of the dome that we can build a metal mine, essentially. And we've also got this rocket that's been patiently telling me it's ready to send back. So we don't have anything to send back in it at the moment, so we're just blasting that rocket off.
Milestone achieved.
And then we'll be able to get more stuff from Earth. So what I've done there, by the way, you can turn buildings on or off, which, it will just not produce anything. at all, and what will happen is the maintenance bar will steadily go up even though it's turned off, but it's not using any power and it's not using any input or giving any output. But you can do the same with constructions, and instead of rushing to try and bring you all the stuff that it needs to build the new construction, it'll just sit there, and you can kind of use this as almost as a blueprint mode for laying things out how you want them. Now what we are of course going to need is cable and pipe connections through to this new dome, and you can build cables and pipes on slightly rougher grounds that you couldn't necessarily build other things on. So it's not always possible, but there are sometimes when you can build stuff around the edges where it wouldn't necessarily go. But as you can see, this is just kind of on the edge of our drone working area. So I think what this means is for the start of making this dome, at least, we're going to have to restrict to building on this side of the dome because the drones won't be able to get to the other side of the dome. At least in theory, we can always test it out. So at the moment, we're not actually trying to build that. That's just sitting there as a theoretical placement.
Cable fault
reported.
And
we're going to get everything into position in terms of pipes. Now, because everything's a little more spread out than is ideal, this is all costing us a bit of metal, so we might actually need to go on a little expedition as we did the first time. And there we go, we've got our water production set up, and we can actually again set that to be low priority. And we've got both the tanks starting to fill up, so we'll maybe be able to turn that off at some point, because at the moment this is only being serviced by the Rc Rover. So we could actually maybe even for now just turn that off, because we're going to want to get some more surface metals. Say that deposit there, that's actually quite a nice big deposit.
Cable fault reported.
So I'm going to put our drone there. We've got our... Are there any other... No, we've not really had any other anomalies to go and do anything about. You'll notice we've got a malfunctioning cable, by the way. Drones will automatically go and repair it, but I think you can direct them to repair it manually, potentially. So, as before, we'll build a metals depot, and they'll automatically collect it, and then we'll be able to use our transport rover to just bring that stuff from over there, because at the moment we're actually running down on metals a little bit, but we're still doing okay. One thing that we will need to significantly upgrade is our power generation capacity, because at the moment we are running out of it, and you can alleviate that to some extent by and you'll notice the work shift system here. I could say have the fuel refinery turned off overnight, so it's using less power overnight. And so because a lot of later on a lot of the buildings by default don't have overnight work shifts, and your workers don't like having overnight work shifts especially. So what will happen is that excess power will get stored, and so even though you might only have positive power generation overnight, that might be enough to then fill up your power storage, which then discharges during the day. And so even though you're at a deficit part of the time because you've got that storage capacity, it doesn't matter. And this is also why you want to go for oxygen generation and oxygen storage rather, and water storage fairly early on, because if something malfunctions, you've got that cushion to fall back on. And talking of oxygen storage, actually we can start thinking about oxygen generation as well, although we won't build the Moxie just yet. Why is that saying it's not connected? Oh, because it's not connected to an oxygen producer, so that's just a tank at the moment.
Research complete.
So we've got that surface deposit. We'll just do the same. We'll set up the auto transport route option. Tell it we're going to unload there, so that'll go and grab the stuff. I don't think there's any other nearby. No, so what we'll do is we'll send the work rover down there for the time being. If I can remember exactly where it was that gave an overlap, it was there, I think. Oh, have I sent the wrong rover? I've sent the wrong rover, never mind. Right, so we'll actually start building that dome then. We'll set that to start constructing. Now, the priority for when you're building something, that's separate from the priority once it's built. So bear that in mind. If you set something to high priority, it means the drones will preferentially bring resources there at the expense of even maybe repairing stuff. So you've got to be a bit careful about that. Personally, I tend to leave it on medium for building priority unless there's something I just urgently need built right now.
Pipe leak reported.
So we're getting towards being able to bring our first colonists. Let's take a look what technologies are coming available. Right, drone hubs we'll want, because the ability to build our own and not have to rely on prefabs is going to be useful. Farms we'll want. There are hydroponics, like single tile, or not single tile, but there are small buildings that give you food to start off with, but farms are more efficient for later on. We'll want them sooner rather than later. Drones and rovers move 25% faster. We'll take that one. And I think that's all good for now. So, we're going to start thinking, once this is built, once we've got oxygen generation going, we're going to start thinking about bringing some colonists, and then we can start making some metals. And that will be fine. Now that needs to move there slightly. How are we doing for actual... Yeah, that should be consuming about as much water as the evaporator is making. So for any extra over that, we need the extractor to be going. You can pin anything, by the way. By default, the game pins certain things. I really wish there were some options for that. I tend to always leave the rovers pinned and the domes pinned, so I can quickly, you click on the pin and the pinned item and it will go around the map. But then later on, once you get colonists with certain traits coming along, rare traits, it will automatically pin them as well. And it's not an issue at first, but later on, and I've got a colony with 2,500 people in it at this point, I've given up trying to get rid of them because you have to click on the thing and then unpin the thing. And if you're doing that for a dozen colonists at a time, yeah, it gets annoying. And there's no, like, I can't, control click or alt click or something to get rid of them. In fact, alt is one of the methods you can use to change the camera point of view. So, how are we doing for that? They're just bringing over materials at the moment. That's going to be most of our polymers, I believe, because we didn't bring that many polymers to start with. We might actually need to order some more polymers, and that rocket will be ready to send back soon as well, so that's fine. And at the moment, rockets are the only things that are going to be using fuel, but later on you get air shuttles as well.
Sector scan.
No deposit. So here we go. This is, as I mentioned earlier, this is what happens with the extractors, the concrete extractors in particular. There's no way to move it. All you can do is demolish it. And we'll build another one. And you'll see, well, you can see where the depleted area is. And actually, if you click on the actual deposit icon, you'll see we've already taken part of that out. So just so we've always got some concrete, or we actually have to wait for it to be removed out of the way first, which I think the drones have to do, because the drones are currently building stuff. And I don't think I can set, no, you can't set a priority on demolition. So what if I turn off that site just while they're doing that? Drones will always try and carry out the last order, basically. There we go. So the drones have taken care of that. So we'll turn the construction site back on. And then we'll build our next extractor there, and there. That means we only need to use a minimal amount of metal to connect it to the power grid. So we're starting to get a decent amount of concrete, but you can never really have too much concrete because it's one of the most basic materials and it's needed a lot for maintenance. Right, so we're going to start building some solar panels now. Just a few more. I tended to, I went a bit heavy on solar panels the first time I was playing through, and then I realised past a certain point they were not really effective anymore, in that I could build much better power generation options, and the solar panels were effectively just costing me lots of metal in terms of maintenance. So there was a certain point when I just decommissioned all of my old solar panels. But for the early to mid game, they are very useful, just because they are relatively cheap in terms of their upkeep. Metal is a very, very basic resource for the most part. So we've nearly got the concrete brought over. The main thing that's holding us back at the moment is we've only got 11 drones, but we don't have any way to make drones at the moment. We're entirely reliant on somehow one of the drones from the rover has escaped. I've accidentally reassigned a drone or something, I guess. I must have. So, another thing we will want at this point as well, because we are probably nearly ready to bring in actual humans, is a oxygen generator. A Moxie. And I'll get a cable connection there. So this is all a little bit messy. You don't, like, this is more of an area covered than is strictly ideal, but it is one of the genuinely quite big restrictions in that certain things can only be worked by buildings that have people in them, and the buildings that have people in them can only have workers if they're right next to a dome. So you end up with domes in places you don't necessarily want, and even once you have bigger domes available, you might still end up putting down little domes next to deposits that you want to work, just so you can have that dome mining that stuff out. But the thing is, once it's mined out, that little dome is still there, using up resources and not necessarily, giving you useful stuff back. So bigger domes are always more efficient in terms of the amount of stuff that you can get in them. So that's now starting to build. Now the materials have all been brought over there, and that rocket's now ready to send back as well, so we might as well do that. Now, fueling operation, yeah, so we've got the fuel ticking over at the moment, that's fine. They'll be building that sooner rather than later. I think we're starting to run down on certain things like polymers. We definitely actually want more polymers.
Sector scanned.
We might even want to wait till I get both rockets available at the same time.
Milestone achieved.
Because
we have an oxygen shortage.
I think I'd much rather build the where are we? This here, the apartment building, which gives more residential space. Just to start with, you get living quarters, which are basic, but or maybe I should just go with the living quarters to start with, because they give. Like, people are happier, basically. There's this comfort rating, so-called, which is one of the global dome ratings. And the higher average comfort of the buildings in a dome represents a higher average comfort in the dome, generally speaking. So, yeah, it's better to, higher comfort means your colonists are less likely to go crazy in the long run. I am not remembering to look at the chat that often. No, Isham Gamer. I suppose not. Right, so we already have the possible upgrade for that. And a lot of buildings do have these upgrades. I thought when I very first started playing that, upgrades just happen automatically when you research them. No, you have to specifically build them. If you've got multiple buildings, and you can actually do this with a lot of things, you can control click. So if I had more than one Moxie, I could, control click to make them all high priority or all low priority. And that goes for upgrades as well. You can control click to build upgrades on all available buildings. And sometimes that can be very useful if you've got a large stockpile.
Sector scan.
Instead of having to go through each one of them individually, because there's no way visually to tell if they're upgraded or not. You can only tell by clicking on them. So you might end up clicking around, 24 different structures on a map just to see which ones are upgraded or not. And it's much easier just to control click at that point. I've not got a lot of room on my other monitor for the chat and the OBS program window, unfortunately. So it does slightly restrict how much of the chat I get to see unless I'm looking at it all the time. So how are we doing for water output? Okay, those are full. The extractors in particular, you can actually mouse over. You do get some tooltip information. They don't necessarily always run at full capacity. So at the moment you can see that we've got 4 unused capacity for that extractor. So they're quite good for a baseline as opposed to the evaporators. The evaporators you can put anywhere. They extract from the atmosphere. And as you can see, you also get that unused production, but they have much less, available, as it were, compared to deposits. So the deposits are quite useful to get earlier on. You can get away without having a deposit if you then buy plenty of evaporators. But of course, the evaporators, half a dozen evaporators are going to cost you more in terms of your power generation than a single extractor will. The dome, by the way, apparently is called Maxwell. You can rename the domes. You can rename pretty much everything in this game. You've also got 2 skins at the moment. So that's a thing I'm sure you'll see a lot of when this game launches. I think adding skins is a comparatively easy thing to do with the mod tools in the game. So yeah, there should be a whole glut of skins very, very quickly. So both the rockets have gone back to Earth. So what we're going to do is we're going to get another cargo rocket. And what did I say I needed? More polymers. We've been getting a little trickle of funding from technology, so we're actually going to go a little bit nuts and buy another Stirling Generator. We don't really need... Okay, well, should we go for another drone hub just now? You know what? No, we'll wait for the technology. We're all right for that for the moment. So we'll go for another Stirling Generator. In fact, we'll go for 2. Let's go completely nuts, because they are, when they're closed, maintenance free. So maybe a couple more drones. Drones are relatively cheap. And I think the rest we're going to just want extra supplies, basically. There's plenty of cargo rocket capacity. I think we might run out of funds before we run out of cargo rocket capacity. Right, so actually I think more electronics are going to be useful than machine parts. Machine parts I've found I tend to use at a much slower rate than electronics. So this is mostly a cargo rocket, but we've got some extra bits on top of that as well. So I'm going to launch that. But we're also then going to, I think we're just about ready to bring in our first colonists. So this is where you, and this was me getting confused earlier, thinking you did this at the start. No, of course you don't. This is where you get to choose who you want. And what we are going to do to start with, and it's a fairly like a limited pool, and the more options that you like, the more selective you are, it reduces the number of potential people in that pool. So what we can do is we can see what the default options are, and you can basically block people that you want not to come to Mars. So there's all these kind of negative traits. So we don't necessarily want any, say, block all the gluttons, for example, because I'm guessing they have higher food consumption. But the main thing that you're going to want to be concentrating on for your very first rocket is specializations. So we are going to want some engineers, some geologists, because we know we're going to work a mine, botanists, medics. We actually won't bother with scientists for now, because we've got this EU sponsor, and because we're getting actually a pretty decent amount of starting science. That's not true with all sponsors. With some of them you will want some starting scientists, you will want a science lab earlier rather than later, but we're not going to do that. And then we'll also take some engineers because we are going to want some people to work in the factory. So it's basically everybody but scientists and non-specialized people. If I click launch, it'll tell me 12 passengers. Okay, so we have enough for within the specializations to actually to fill out a rocket. And what I could maybe do then is we could perhaps see if we can't get some... we'll maybe leave off trying to take particular perks for now, but we could maybe try and say disallow. Okay, yeah, we'll go for that. So launch anyway, because the reason it's giving me that warning is I haven't built any buildings yet. Well, what we're going to be able to do is okay, we're actually not getting a lot of starting food with these people, so we will need to build some food Remove security people. Oh, I guess they're not really useful earlier on. Yeah, you're probably right. I probably didn't need those Time Warper. I've just been in the habit of doing that. But bear in mind, this is only my third start, so it's not like I'm super experienced at this already. But come to think of it, yeah, security people you probably don't need to start with. Later on, once you've got a higher population, they do become useful. But okay, yes. Let's add that to the list of things that you don't really need at the start then as security people. Never mind. Anyway, they can still work in other buildings. You know, no matter the specialization, people can work in any buildings. But if they work in a building they're specialized for, then they actually give a bonus to the production, basically. And they are, I think, happier for working in their own specialization. So we're going to want to start thinking about things to actually put in the dome. So some of it's fairly self-explanatory. They need somewhere to live and they need somewhere to get food from, and then you need somewhere for them to relax and have some social interaction, because otherwise they'll go a bit crazy. Now, how are we set up for drone hubs? We'll actually take out fuel compression and re-add that to the end of the list and have drone hubs as the next thing we research, because we will need drone hubs sooner rather than later. We're not starting off with farms, but for a small population, a hydroponic farm should be more than good enough. So what we'll do, even though we don't actually have the materials for it at the moment, we'll actually set down the apartments. And that is enough. That one residential building is enough for basically everybody to live in to start with. Now, what else will we want? Well, I tend to always have put down a security station to start with, but maybe that's not necessary, actually. It does, as you see there, renegades are basically criminals. You don't really get those until later on, or unless a lot of people get really unhappy. But sanity loss from disasters is, you know, they have more than one function. So if the dome gets hit by a meteor, for example, the people living in that dome are not going to be very happy, but they'll be slightly less unhappy if you've got a security station. But to start with, I think an infirmary and a diner, and then we'll see how we go. So they'll have somewhere to eat and they'll have somewhere to get treated. And as you'll see, the drones are now bringing the resources that they can. What we'll do is we'll actually turn off the construction of the apartments for the time being, because we do need polymers for maintenance of the battery. And by the way, if you're wondering about this, the maintenance all happens automatically. There is no way to... and this is one of the suggestions I have made. There's no way to click on a drone hub and say, okay, I want this drone hub to prioritize, 60% construction, 30%, well, we wouldn't even go for 60% construction, say 30% construction, 40% moving materials around, and then 30% on maintenance and repair. It would be nice to have that as an option, but it isn't there yet. You've got some snow in Kentucky. We haven't had snow here for, it's been weeks and weeks now, I think, but anyway, yeah. So, other things that we can do while waiting for the rockets to turn up, and actually we can put it back into fast forwards. I spent a lot of time in this game fast forwarding things, but we can put down the metal extractor, which will possibly partially overlap the concrete deposit, and we can actually, and it's going to be slightly annoying because in that position, actually what we can do is we can hit the delete key and remove that. We'll shift that slightly so we can at least click on the deposit icon. And that should be fine. So okay, we'll turn that off for the time being. So they're not bringing anything to it yet. But again, we're just kind of using the ability to do that as a planning aid, essentially.
Resources are low.
So which one's going to be? That's the cargo rocket. Okay, that one. What else do we need? Well, we're starting to need to think about increasing power generation with people actually at the moment we're not running at an overall surplus, but even with some stuff turned off overnight. Now we do get a slight elevation boost, like if we were building windmills down here, you get 0 elevation boost. So there is basically a boost to like if you place them on high ground, they'll generate more. And there's also upgrades that the windmills get later on as well. I've talked a little bit in previous streams about why windmills on Mars are a bit of a silly concept outside of they don't really work unless there's a dust storm going on, because it's extremely thin, the atmosphere. There was actually a comment under one of the videos. It was kind of weird. Somebody linked to even just like the Wikipedia article on the atmosphere of Mars, and clearly hadn't read the link, because it was basically like they were getting slightly, like, I don't know, argumentative about they thought I was saying that Mars didn't have an atmosphere, which is not what I'd said at all. And the Wikipedia article they linked basically pointed out that for the like the average surface elevation on Mars, it's like 0.6 of the average mean sea level atmospheric pressure on Earth. Like 0.6, just over 0.5%. As far as the human body's concerned, you might as well be in a vacuum for what that would do to you. So yeah, it's not really enough to run a windmill unless there's a lot of force behind it, basically. And I think it's about 3 times the amount of force required. So basically, during dust storms. But one of the features of the game is, you do get extra power generation during dust storms. So they've kind of acknowledged the fact that dust storms give power, but the fact that you just get power normally doesn't particularly make sense. So this is the resources rocket that we're offloading. We'll actually, as a priority, get them to build the apartments, and then we'll land our passenger rocket. Now, there is a timer on how long the passenger rocket can stay in orbit, and everyone will die if you don't land them. So we've got a little bit of time to work with here. Well, again, yes, they've kind of slightly taken liberties with it, but the idea of making building materials, Marscrete essentially, from what you'll find on Mars is, that's based, as far as we know, on reality. But the way it's implemented in the game is a little bit silly, yes. There's one of the Wonder buildings, one of the mega projects you can build later on, which basically you just plonk it down and it just generates concrete wherever you plonk it down. It doesn't then even need to be on a concrete deposit. So, this game, it is essentially a sci-fi themed city builder. It's not really any kind of super hardcore, like, this is how we'll colonize Mars game. Far from it. So we've got basically the drones moving into position. How are we doing for other things? We're going to need another drone hub down here, and we're going to need another drone hub down here, but we're just waiting on the research at the moment. And what we can do is we can just, like, every so often, every like, I don't know, 5 or 6 techs, we'll just repeat Martian patents. And it will slow down my overall research a little bit, but it also means we'll never ever run out of cash. And never running out of cash means you can resupply from Earth, which is incredibly useful. So we'll actually set that to normal priority because we want the drones to concentrate on building this rather than refueling the rocket. And that's actually a drone that's run out of power. So we can do something about that. I think if we select that drone there, the rover, I think the rover you should be able to. I'm sure there's an option. If I bring my drone rover over here, I'm sure there is an option, or else you can have another drone. No, I could have sworn there was an option to have a drone go and recharge another drone, but I think it must just be the drone rover. Also, how's that going for resources? I'm just waiting on stuff being brought over. So they're partially unloading this rocket at the moment, but we might actually even set that to low priority. Right, okay, one of the rovers did it automatically, that's fine. Or the drones did it automatically. So we can actually send this back down here for the time being. Because if this breaks down while there's no rover nearby, there's no way to refix it. Refix it, yes. Right, 106 hours, that's fine. We're just waiting for this apartment building to get built. And then we can build the metals extractor. And then, hey presto, we've got a more reliable source of metals. But we're going to need an entirely separate dome down here for this rare metals deposit. So we'll place that there for now, but we'll just turn that off and we'll have that as a placeholder for later on, essentially. And that should be fine. Well, that is within the right area. So we'll build also some other things here. So we're going to build food depot, and we're going to build a metals depot there, and then we're going to want some more dumping sites, because again this will produce waste rock, and it has to go somewhere or else it just builds up around the actual extractor. Building's not working. Oh yeah, because we don't have any personnel. So come on, bit more concrete. That's all we need. This is one of those times when it'd be super useful to have a bit more control over what your drones are doing, but this is the best you can manage, is to put the priority on the construction up as high as it'll go. Otherwise it's a little bit out of your hands. So that's nearly there. We'll also build maybe one of the factories. Oh, we've got the Stirling Generator prefabs. We should put those down as well, actually. Where did I put the other one? I've lost it. It was somewhere. Oh, there it is. So we'll put the Stirling Generator prefabs, because they just, like the drones, just come along and build them. And that's a bit more baseline power production. And if we mouse over that tooltip, and it's useful for seeing the resources, but it falls down a bit in terms of when you're looking at food production, because food takes time to produce, whereas most other things are produced on a daily basis. You can see your excesses, basically, how much extra you're producing over how much you need. So we might well want to upgrade that Moxie, or even just build another Moxie. But if we upgrade the Moxie, it's, 2 Moxies is 4 metals in maintenance, whereas 1 Moxie upgraded costs the 5 polymers, but it isn't costing any extra in maintenance. So we might even want to upgrade that. Right, there we go. That building is now built. Can finally bring down the rocket with the passengers. And that's still got stuff on board, so the drones will be doing what they do with that. We'll also build a recharge station over here, because they will go back to the hub to recharge, but I don't know, we saw that one run out of charge there, so they don't always necessarily make it. So what will happen? We get our first colonists coming down.
Full of hope and
we get that message that comes up.
Milestone achieved.
And basically you get a 10-day waiting period. There you go, they all run out. So anytime they leave the dome, they automatically get spacesuits. But if they're outside the dome too long, they will run out of oxygen and die. That is possible. Generally speaking, they won't try and cross distances that they can't actually physically, make it over in terms of then dying. But didn't we order drones with orders? Yes, we did, so we need to actually transfer those. But I basically had a pathfinding bug that cropped up, and the colonists were trying to get to somewhere that was much too far away and ended up dying in the process. So there we go, we'll reassign that one. So the drones will be busy getting the food out, because you start off with a very small stock of supply of starting food, at least at this difficulty you do. Like I said, it's not the same for all sponsors, and we can now actually get the metals extractor going as well. So everybody will live here for now. Comfort of residence 35 is not particularly great. But we can upgrade it very slightly by building a little garden in the dome. And if you've got these smaller buildings that take up 3 hexes, there'll always be room for a 1 hex garden in between, basically. So, how are we doing? Plenty of power. Water we'll be fine with. And so we're going to want a food building as our next building, basically. That'll be the next priority. And at that point, we'll probably think about wrapping the stream up, because we'll basically have gotten as far as we need to get with the very early game in terms of getting everybody to where they need to be. Right, we've reassigned all those drones. That's fine. So, we've got people working in the infirmary. Now, as far as I know, the game will try and get people working in the right specializations as much as it possibly can. But it happens over time, and you can try and do it yourself manually, but it doesn't always stick, and it's also incredibly fiddly to do. So I've tended to just leave it to itself in that regard. Anyway, let's build the hydroponics. You don't have to land them. No, I mean, as long as it's close enough for them to run across. Like if I landed the passenger rocket over here somewhere, that might be a bit of a problem. Also, apparently, we have an anomaly that popped up that I guess my headphones had slightly crapped out at that point. So we'll send our science rover over to that and get the scanning going again. So, our first dome, and what we will do is, well, of the factories available, of the prefabs that we brought earlier, the polymer factory uses fuel, which we are producing. The machine parts factory uses metal, which we will be producing, and the electronics factory uses rare metals, and we're going to need a whole other dome before we can get rare metals going. So we're going to have to rely on Earth for rare metals for at least a while. But what we can do is we can use this machine parts factory prefab. So that's not even costing me any resources to build with the prefabs. That's the nice thing with the prefabs. You just buy them. You don't have to spend any money. You do spend money. You don't have to spend any resources setting them up. So we can start to get a trickle. So that's one less thing we need to buy from Earth, basically. We're just starting to try and set up the supply chains where we need to buy less and less from Earth and get to the point where we are self-sufficient. Beowulfiger. Yeah, this is a different start from the one I was showing off in the previous streams. This is a much easier difficulty on the basis that I think most new players of the game, when they buy it in a couple of days' time, will be probably coming to it with, starting off with one of the easier difficulties rather than jumping 100% feet first into like 535% difficulty, which I think is the hardest start that anybody has discovered so far. Okay.
There were no secrets to find near the anomaly site.
Oh, there we go. Celebrity applicants based on is available on Earth. So that's somebody we might want to bring over with the next colonist rocket, because celebrities are another way you make a small amount of cash. If you have a celebrity colonist, I think I don't even know how much it brings you in, but it's one of the ways you can make a bit of money earlier on. So yeah, I think we're about ready to wrap things up. This is where we're at. We are, because of the starting options, basically never going to have to worry that much about funding. We've set things up with water and oxygen. We've got concrete. We're going to have metals production. And so the next thing really is going to be rare metals production, which is going to involve building a whole other dome. So probably the next priorities are going to be building up the resources and infrastructure to the point where we can bring more colonists in. We're also going to need some more drone hubs as well. So it's basically, it's a bit of a balancing act. It's like other games like Banished, where you try not to grow too quickly and just to make sure that you're coming along at a pace that's not going to overtax things. But just like Banished, you've got the option of disasters happening, and so something nasty might happen which might throw you off. But with this level of starting difficulty, you know, it's been a relatively easy ride. With the harder starting difficulty that I tried for the previous 2 streams, it was a much harder balancing act in terms of keeping everything going. And we almost lost all of the colonists at various points, and we still might lose all of the colonists if I do come back to trying that on stream. But you know, as they say with Dwarf Fortress, losing is fun because it's a learning experience. And that's, you know, that doesn't necessarily hold true for every game, but I think this might be one of those games where it kind of does. This isn't a review, Beowulf. This is just a starting guide, as it says in the stream title. Reviews are embargoed until the 15th. This is why there's been all these people streaming it and, you know, showing stuff off, but the reviews proper won't appear until the 15th. So, yeah, it's just about time for me to go anyway, because I have another thing to do at 6:30. So, this seems like a good place to stop, though. We've gotten ourselves off a really good footing with this colony. And this wasn't even with a super easy start. This was around about 100%, 110% difficulty. The easiest possible difficulty with the International Mars mission, it's like, what, 30%, 20%, something like that. So it is possible to have a much easier starting level of difficulty if you want, but as we've seen, even at this level of difficulty, it's really not that hard at all. So you don't necessarily need to go for something super easy to start with. Maybe misses out a bit too much of the challenge, maybe makes it a bit too easy. So, yeah, thank you everybody who has tuned in, and if you missed any of it, this is obviously all going on YouTube. And I'll probably be streaming more of this because, you know, it's launching soon. So the stream schedule might be a little bit heavy on surviving Mars, but I'll try and work in some World of Warships as well. So wherever you are, have a good evening, and I shall catch you next time.